The blood on her cheek had already dried by the time Eliza Thornton stumbled into the trading post at the base of the Colorado Rockies, her dress torn at the shoulder and her eyes holding the kind of emptiness that comes from years of learning to feel nothing at all. The year was 1871, and the mountain territories were still wild enough that a woman alone drew stares, but the bruises on her arms made those stares slide away just as quickly. People in these parts knew better than to ask questions about things that were none of their business, especially when those questions involved a man's wife and what he might do to her behind closed doors. Eliza had been running for 3 days straight, her feet blistered inside her worn boots, her stomach empty except for the creek water she had cupped in her trembling hands that morning. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could never go back. The trading post was a rough building constructed of hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, and it smelled of tobacco, leather, and the sharp tang of pelts waiting to be sorted. A few trappers lounged near the pot-bellied stove, their conversation dying the moment she pushed through the door. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with mutton chops that reached his collar, looked up from his ledger and frowned. "We do not serve women without their husbands, miss," he said, his voice not unkind but firm in the way of men who followed the unwritten rules of frontier life. Eliza opened her mouth to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I need supplies. I can work. I can clean or cook or anything you need. Please." The proprietor's frown deepened as he took in her appearance more fully, his gaze lingering on the purple shadows beneath her eyes and the way she held her left arm against her ribs as though something there still ached. Before he could respond, the door behind Eliza opened again, bringing with it a gust of cold mountain air and a presence so substantial that even the trappers by the stove straightened slightly. The man who entered had to duck his head to clear the doorframe. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly brushed the jambs on either side. His hair, dark brown shot through with hints of copper in the lamplight, fell past his collar in waves that suggested he cut it himself when it grew too long to be practical. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy wool shirt that strained across a chest built from years of splitting wood, hauling water, and surviving winters that killed lesser men. His face was weathered but not old, perhaps 30 years at most, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth and eyes the color of mountain storms, gray and piercing. Eliza stepped aside instinctively, making herself smaller the way she had learned to do, but the man barely glanced at her as he moved to the counter with the easy, efficient movements of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Caleb," the proprietor greeted him with considerably more warmth than he had shown Eliza. "Good to see you down from your claim. Need your usual supplies?" "And then some, Henry," the man called Caleb replied, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Eliza's chest. "Winter was hard. I'm running low on salt and cornmeal." As Henry began gathering items from the shelves behind him, Eliza edged toward the door, recognizing that her presence was unwelcome and that she had no money to purchase anything anyway. She would have to find another way. Perhaps offer her labor at one of the mining camps further up the valley, though the thought of being surrounded by rough men made her stomach twist with familiar dread. She had her hand on the door handle when Caleb's voice stopped her. "You're bleeding." Eliza froze, her heart suddenly hammering. She touched her cheek where she knew a cut had reopened during her long walk, her fingers coming away red. "It is nothing," she managed. "It is something," Caleb said, and now he was looking at her directly for the first time, those storm-gray eyes taking in details she wished he would not see. "When did you last eat?" The question was so unexpected, so devoid of judgment or accusation, that Eliza felt her throat tighten dangerously. "I am fine, sir. Please, I will be on my way." "Henry, add some jerky and hardtack to my order," Caleb said, turning back to the proprietor as though Eliza had not spoken. "And some of that salve your wife makes, the one with comfrey." "Now, Caleb," Henry began, but something in the mountain man's expression made him close his mouth and nod instead. He began adding items to the pile on the counter, moving with more speed than before. Eliza felt panic rising in her chest, the kind that made her want to bolt even though she had nowhere to bolt to. "I cannot pay you back," she said, hating how her voice shook. "I have nothing." Caleb gathered his supplies into a large canvas pack, moving with the same unhurried efficiency he seemed to bring to everything. When he finally turned to face her fully, Eliza had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and she braced herself for what would come next. Men did not give things to women for free. There was always a price, always something they wanted in return, and she had learned exactly what that something was. "I did not ask you to pay me back," Caleb said simply. He held out a wrapped bundle of jerky. "Eat something. You look like you might fall over." Eliza stared at the offered food, her mind struggling to process this interaction. Her hands remained at her sides even as her empty stomach cramped with hunger. "Why?" "Because you are hungry," Caleb said, as though this were the most logical thing in the world. When she still did not move, he set the jerky on the barrel beside her. "Suit yourself. But it will be there when you change your mind." He shouldered his pack, settling the weight with a slight adjustment of those massive shoulders, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at Henry. "If she needs work, send word up to my claim. I could use help with some things before winter comes around again." Then he was gone, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the afternoon sunlight that slanted through the pine trees surrounding the trading post. Eliza stared after him, her mind reeling. Henry cleared his throat, drawing her attention back. "Look, miss, I meant what I said before. This is not a charity house, but Caleb Stone is a good man, probably the best in these mountains. If he says he has work for you, he means honest work. No funny business." Henry's expression softened slightly. "Whatever you are running from, you would be safer up at his claim than anywhere else around here. That is all I will say on the matter." Eliza looked down at the jerky on the barrel, then at her own trembling hands. She had not known kindness without strings attached in so long that she had almost forgotten it existed. Her husband, Thomas Thornton, had been all charm and smooth words when he courted her in St. Louis 3 years ago. She had been 19, an orphan working in a boarding house, and he had seemed like salvation itself with his promises of a better life out west. The first time he hit her was 2 weeks after their wedding. By the time they reached Colorado, she had learned to recognize the signs that preceded his rages and to make herself as invisible as possible. But it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough. She picked up the jerky with shaking fingers and took a small bite, the salt and smoke flavor exploding across her tongue. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Where is his claim?" she asked quietly. Henry gave her directions, pointing toward a trail that wound up into the higher elevations, where the pine forests grew thick and the peaks scraped the sky. "About 6 miles up, following Clearwater Creek. You will know the place when you see it. He has a good cabin, built solid." Henry hesitated, then added, "And miss, whatever you think men are like based on what you have known, Caleb Stone is different. Give him a chance to prove it." Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left the trading post with the jerky clutched in her hand and a tiny, fragile seed of something that might have been hope beginning to take root in the barren soil of her heart. The walk up to Caleb Stone's claim took her most of the remaining afternoon, and by the time she spotted the cabin nestled in a clearing beside the rushing creek, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The cabin was indeed well built, constructed of thick logs fitted together with expert precision, with a stone chimney at one end and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport up the mountain. Smoke rose from the chimney in a steady stream, and Eliza could see a barn and several outbuildings arranged around the clearing, all showing the same careful craftsmanship as the main structure. She stood at the edge of the trees for a long moment, gathering her courage. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to not put herself in another situation where a man had power over her, but where would she run to? She had no money, no family, and winter in the Rockies was deadly for those unprepared to face it. At least this man, this Caleb Stone, had been kind so far. That had to count for something. She stepped into the clearing just as Caleb emerged from the barn, carrying an axe over one shoulder. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the distance. Then he nodded, as though she were exactly what he had been expecting, and set the axe against the barn wall. "You made good time," he said as he approached. "Trail can be tricky if you do not know it." "I followed the creek like the man at the trading post said," Eliza replied, hating how small her voice sounded. She squared her shoulders, trying to summon some of the pride she used to have before Thomas broke it out of her. "He said you might have work. I am a good cook, and I can clean and mend and do laundry. I do not eat much, and I can sleep anywhere. I just need a place to stay for a while until I figure out what to do next." Caleb listened to this speech with his head tilted slightly, those gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. Finally, he nodded. "I could use help with the cooking and such. I'm not much good at it myself, and I have been eating mostly jerky and beans for longer than I care to admit. The work is not hard, just steady. I would pay fair wages and you would have your own room in the cabin with a lock on the door." The last part made Eliza's breath catch. A lock on the door, as though he understood exactly what she feared and was addressing it directly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Come on then," Caleb said, gesturing toward the cabin. "I will show you around and you can get settled. There's a pump out back for washing up if you want." The inside of the cabin was as well made as the outside, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, dominated by a large stone fireplace. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly handmade, and everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. Caleb showed her to a small room off the main area, barely large enough for the narrow bed and chest of drawers it contained, but it had its own window looking out over the creek and, true to his word, a solid lock on the door. "I'm usually up before dawn," Caleb said as Eliza stood in the doorway of what was now her room. "I do my trapping early, then come back to work on other things around the claim. I would appreciate breakfast ready when I return and supper in the evening. The rest of the day is yours to do with as you please." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I will not ask you about what you are running from. That is your business. But you should know that you are safe here. I do not hold with men who hurt women. Never have. Never will." Eliza felt something crack inside her chest, some defensive wall she had built up starting to crumble at the edges. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You do not even know me." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My mother ran from a bad situation when I was a boy," he said finally. "Took me and my sister and disappeared in the middle of the night. We ended up in a mining camp in Nevada, and she worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. I was 14 when she died. I have always wished someone had helped her the way she needed, given her a chance to rest and heal." His eyes focused back on Eliza. "I suppose I'm trying to do now what no one did for her then?" Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks before she could stop them, and she turned away quickly, embarrassed by her lack of control. "I am sorry," she managed, "about your mother." "It was a long time ago," Caleb said gently. "Get some rest. You look like you need it. We can start fresh in the morning." That first night in Caleb Stone's cabin, Eliza locked her door and lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the mountain, the creek rushing over stones, the wind in the pines, the occasional call of an owl hunting in the darkness, and from the main room, the quiet sounds of Caleb banking the fire and settling into his own bed on the far side of the cabin. She waited for footsteps approaching her door, for the testing of the handle, for the violence she had learned to expect. But none came. Eventually, as the moon rose high over the peaks, she fell into the first truly restful sleep she had experienced in 3 years. She woke to gray dawn light filtering through her window and the sound of the front door closing as Caleb headed out for his morning trap line. Eliza rose quickly, splashing cold water on her face from the basin on her dresser, and set about making breakfast. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, and a few precious eggs from what must be chickens in one of the outbuildings. She found a sourdough starter in a crock, still active and smelling tangy, and set about making flapjacks and frying up some of the salt pork. When Caleb returned 2 hours later, the cabin was filled with the smell of coffee and cooking food. He stopped in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders from a brief flurry outside, and something like surprise crossed his features. "It smells like a real home," he said, and there was such genuine pleasure in his voice that Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "I hope the flapjacks are all right," she said, setting a plate on the table. "I was not sure how you liked them." "I'm sure they are perfect," Caleb replied, hanging his coat on a peg and moving to the wash basin to clean up before eating. Eliza noticed that his hands, despite their size and obvious strength, moved with surprising gentleness as he dried them on the towel. He sat at the table and took a bite, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "These are more than all right. These are the best flapjacks I have had in years." They ate in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Eliza found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile this quiet, gentle man with everything she had learned to expect from the male species. He did not demand conversation. He did not criticize her cooking or her appearance. He simply ate his breakfast with obvious enjoyment, thanked her sincerely when he was finished, and then excused himself to work on repairing a section of fence that had sustained damage over the winter. The days began to develop a rhythm. Eliza cooked and cleaned and mended, and Caleb worked his trap lines and maintained his claim and treated her with a consistent, unvarying courtesy that she found more unsettling than kindness, because she kept waiting for it to end. She kept waiting for him to reveal his true nature, to show her what he really wanted in exchange for his hospitality. But weeks passed, and he never asked for anything beyond the work they had agreed upon. She watched him when she thought he was not looking, fascinated despite herself by the way he moved, by the casual display of strength when he lifted things that would take two normal men to carry, by the way he was always careful to make noise when approaching so as not to startle her. His hands, huge and scarred from years of hard living, were capable of remarkable gentleness. She saw it in the way he handled injured animals he sometimes brought back from his trap line, carefully nursing a fox with a broken leg or tending to a hawk with a damaged wing until they were strong enough to be released back into the wild. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Eliza was mending one of Caleb's shirts when she noticed him watching her from across the room. She paused, her heart beginning to race with the old familiar fear, but his expression held only curiosity. "You are very skilled at that," he observed, nodding toward the nearly invisible stitches she was making in a torn seam. "Where did you learn?" "I worked in a boarding house in St. Louis before I was married," Eliza said carefully, still not comfortable talking about her past. "The woman who ran it taught me all sorts of useful skills. She said a woman needed to be able to take care of herself." "She sounds like a wise woman," Caleb said. "She was," Eliza agreed, and then, surprising herself, she continued, "I wish I had listened to her better. She did not want me to marry Thomas. She said there was something not right about him, something too smooth, but I was young and stupid, and thought I knew better." The name of her husband hung in the air between them. It was the first time she had spoken it aloud since arriving at the cabin. Caleb did not react with surprise or press her for details. He simply nodded slowly. "We all make choices we wish we could take back," he said quietly. "The measure of a person is not in never making mistakes, but in what they do after. You had the courage to leave. That counts for something." "I do not feel courageous," Eliza admitted, setting down her mending. "I feel like a coward. I should have left sooner. I should have never married him in the first place." "Survival is not cowardice," Caleb said firmly, "and leaving took more bravery than staying ever could. You walked away from everything you knew with nothing but the clothes on your back. That is courage in my book." Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, this mountain of muscle and quiet strength, understood in a way she had not expected anyone to understand. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, and Eliza saw something flicker in those gray eyes, something warm and almost tender. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "It is late. I should let you get your rest." As the weeks turned into months, Eliza found herself settling into life on the mountain in ways she had not thought possible. The constant tension she had lived with for 3 years began to ease, replaced by a sense of security she had almost forgotten existed. She learned the rhythms of Caleb's life, the way he moved through his days with purpose and care, and she found herself looking forward to their quiet evenings together, sitting by the fire while she mended and he carved small wooden figures that he traded at the post. Summer arrived in full, painting the high meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of pine and sun-warmed stone. Caleb began teaching her about the mountain, pointing out edible plants and showing her how to read the signs of changing weather. He taught her to fish in the creek, laughing at her squeals of delight when she caught her first trout, and she taught him how to make proper biscuits and a dozen other dishes that brought such pleasure to his face that she found herself cooking more elaborate meals just to see his reactions. It was during one of their fishing expeditions in July that Eliza realized she was falling in love with him. They were standing side by side in the creek, the cold water rushing around their bare feet, and Caleb was patiently showing her how to tie a better knot in her line. His hands, so large they could easily span her waist, moved with precision and care as he demonstrated the technique. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the scent of pine and leather and something uniquely him. "Like this," he was saying, his deep voice rumbling in a way that made her shiver despite the summer heat. "Loop it through twice, then pull tight. There, see? That will hold even a big fish." Eliza wasn't paying attention to the knot. She was watching his face, the concentration in his expression, the way the sun caught in his hair and turned it bronze, the strength in his jaw and the surprising softness of his mouth. She was thinking about how safe she felt standing next to him, how his presence had become the most important part of her day, how she had started waking up eager to see him rather than dreading the beginning of each new day. "Eliza," Caleb's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right? You look flushed. Is the sun too much?" "No," she managed, her cheeks burning hotter at being caught staring. "I'm fine. Just thank you for teaching me all these things, for being so patient." Something changed in Caleb's expression, his eyes darkening to the color of storm clouds. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but the touch sent electricity racing through her entire body. "You make it easy to be patient," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You make a lot of things easy." They stood frozen like that for a long moment, the creek rushing around them, and the mountain world continuing on while something profound and fragile formed between them. Then a fish jumped nearby, breaking the spell, and they both laughed shakily and returned to their fishing, but something had shifted. The air felt charged now, full of possibility and longing. That night, Eliza lay in her narrow bed and pressed her hands to her racing heart. She was terrified by what she was feeling, by the way her body responded to Caleb's presence, by how much she wanted to know what his arms would feel like around her, what his lips would feel like pressed to hers. Thomas had made physical intimacy something to be endured, something that left her feeling used and hollow. But the thought of Caleb touching her did not fill her with dread. It filled her with a yearning so intense it was almost painful. But what if she was wrong about him? What if he was just better at hiding his true nature? The thought made her feel sick, but she could not entirely silence the voice of fear that Thomas had planted in her mind, the one that whispered that all men were the same underneath, that kindness was just a mask they wore until they had you trapped. The next few weeks were a special kind of torture. Eliza found herself hyper-aware of every interaction with Caleb, reading meaning into every glance and casual touch. She noticed that he seemed to be struggling with something as well, catching him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, seeing the way his hands clenched when she accidentally brushed against him in the narrow confines of the cabin. The tension finally broke on an afternoon in early August. Eliza had gone to gather berries in a meadow about a mile from the cabin, a place Caleb had shown her that was thick with ripe blackberries. She was so absorbed in her task, her bucket nearly full of the sweet fruit, that she did not hear the approach of riders until they were already at the edge of the meadow. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men with hard eyes and the kind of swagger that came from being used to taking what they wanted. They stopped their horses and looked at her with expressions that made Eliza's blood run cold. "Well, what do we have here?" the leader said, dismounting with a creak of leather. "Pretty little thing all alone in the wilderness. That does not seem safe, does it, boys?" Eliza's heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the berry bucket and turned to run, but one of the other men had already circled around behind her, cutting off her escape. She was trapped. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I do not want any trouble. I'm just gathering berries." "We can see that," the leader said, moving closer. He was a big man, not as large as Caleb, but substantial, with a face that showed the marks of past violence. "The question is, who do you belong to? A woman this pretty should not be wandering around unclaimed." "I belong to no one," Eliza said, backing away and finding herself against the man who had circled behind her. Hands grabbed her arms, holding her in place, and she felt panic rising in her throat like bile. This was it. This was what she had been running from, the violence and violation that seemed to follow women like a curse. "Let me go," she screamed, struggling against the grip, but the man holding her just laughed. "She's got some fire," he said appreciatively. I like that in a woman. The leader reached out to touch her face, and Eliza twisted away violently, managing to get one arm free and raking her nails across his cheek. He swore and backhanded her, the blow snapping her head to the side and filling her mouth with the copper taste of blood. Stars exploded across her vision. "You will pay for that, you little wildcat," the leader snarled, grabbing the front of her dress. Then, a voice like thunder rolled across the meadow. "Take your hands off her!" Eliza's eyes flew open to see Caleb standing at the far edge of the clearing, and he looked like something out of a legend. He had been working on the roof when she left and had clearly dropped everything to follow her. He wore no shirt, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat in the afternoon sun, his hair wild around his face, and in his hands he carried his wood-cutting axe. But it was not the axe that made the men freeze. It was the expression on his face, a cold fury that promised violence in its most primal form. "This is none of your business, friend," the leader said, though his voice had lost some of its bravado. "Just passing through and found this unclaimed woman. She is fair game." "She is not unclaimed," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet as he began walking toward them with slow, purposeful strides. "She is mine, and you are about to learn what happens to men who threaten what belongs to me." The way he said it, the possessiveness in those words, should have frightened Eliza, should have reminded her of Thomas's controlling rage, but instead, she felt relief flood through her because she understood what he was doing. In the lawless frontier, women needed men's protection, and Caleb was claiming her as his to keep her safe from exactly this kind of situation. The man holding Eliza must have sensed the danger, because he released her and stepped back, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "Now, hold on. We did not know she was spoken for. No need for anyone to get hurt." "Too late for that," Caleb said, and his eyes flicked to Eliza's bleeding lip, to the mark already darkening on her cheek. "You hurt her. That means we have a problem." The leader tried to bluster. 3 against 1 is not good odds for you, mountain man. Maybe you should just walk away while you still can." 3 against 1, Caleb agreed, and a smile crossed his face that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the promise of pain. "I like those odds just fine." What happened next was over almost before Eliza could process it. The man who had been holding her went for his gun, but Caleb moved with a speed that belied his size, closing the distance and swinging the flat of his axe into the man's stomach. The man went down hard, gasping for air. The second man tried to rush Caleb from the side, but Caleb simply caught him by the front of his shirt and threw him bodily into a tree. The crack of impact was sickening. The leader, seeing his companions disposed of, pulled his gun and aimed it at Caleb's chest. "Do not move, or I will shoot you where you stand." Caleb stopped, but his eyes were utterly fearless. "You fire that gun, and you better make sure I am dead with one shot, because if I am still standing, I am going to take that gun away from you and beat you to death with it. And even if you kill me, my woman there—" He jerked his head toward Eliza without taking his eyes off the leader. "She is a better shot than me, and she has got my rifle pointed at your back right now." It was a bluff. Eliza had no rifle, and Caleb knew it, but the leader did not. His eyes flicked toward Eliza, and in that moment of distraction, Caleb moved. He knocked the gun aside just as it fired, the bullet going wide, and drove his fist into the leader's face with a sound like a hammer striking meat. The leader went down and did not get up. Silence fell over the meadow, broken only by the groaning of the 2 men still conscious and the ragged sound of Caleb's breathing. He stood there for a moment, his massive chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists, and then he turned to Eliza. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with residual anger and fear. Eliza shook her head, though her cheek throbbed and her split lip was bleeding freely. "Nothing that will not heal." Caleb crossed to her in 3 long strides and surprised her by pulling her into his arms, holding her against his chest with a tenderness that completely contradicted the violence he had just displayed. She could feel his heart hammering, could feel the fine tremor running through his muscles as the adrenaline worked through his system. "I heard you scream," he said into her hair. "I have never been so scared in my life." Eliza pressed her face against his bare chest, feeling the warmth of his skin, the solid reality of him, and let herself cry. Not from fear or pain, but from relief, and from the overwhelming realization that someone had fought for her, had put himself in danger to protect her. Caleb held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soothing words that barely registered, but comforted her nonetheless. Finally, she pulled back enough to look up at him. "You called me yours," she said. Caleb's expression was unreadable. "I did. I'm sorry if that presumed too much, but it was the only way they would back down. Men like that only understand ownership." "I know why you did it," Eliza said softly. "But Caleb, I need to know. Did you just say that, or did you mean it?" The question hung between them, huge and fraught with implications. Caleb's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs gentle as they wiped away her tears, careful to avoid her injured cheek. "I meant it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "God help me, Eliza. I've been fighting how I feel about you since the day you walked into my life. I know you have been hurt. I know you have reasons not to trust, especially not to trust men. But I am in love with you. Have been for months now. And if you can never feel the same way, I will understand. But I need you to know that my feelings are real." Eliza felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "You love me?" "With everything I have," Caleb confirmed, and the raw honesty in his eyes left no room for doubt. "I love you too," Eliza breathed, and saying the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. "I am terrified and confused, and I do not know if I even know what love is supposed to feel like, but when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel like I can breathe. I feel like I am home. If that is not love, then I do not know what is." Caleb made a sound low in his chest, something between a laugh and a sob, and then he was kissing her. His lips touched hers with a gentleness that stole her breath, asking permission rather than demanding, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Eliza did not want to pull away. She wanted to sink into this, into him, into the feeling of being cherished rather than claimed. She rose on her toes and wrapped her arms around his neck, and Caleb's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer but never gripping too tight, always giving her space to breathe. The kiss deepened, and Eliza felt desire uncoil in her belly, warm and sweet and utterly unlike the dread that physical intimacy had always inspired. This was what it was supposed to feel like. This connection, this tenderness, this sense of being treasured. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should get you back to the cabin and tend to that cut." "What about them?" Eliza asked, glancing at the three men. The leader was starting to stir, groaning. "They will leave when they wake up," Caleb said with certainty, "and if they are smart, they will leave the territory entirely. But just in case, I am going to make sure they understand that if they ever come near you again, what I did today will seem merciful by comparison." He kept his arm around Eliza as they walked back to the cabin, leaving the men to sort themselves out. True to his word, Caleb spent the next hour carefully cleaning her split lip and applying salve to her bruised cheek, his touch so gentle that Eliza found herself falling even more deeply in love with him. These hands that could split logs and kill men with brutal efficiency were touching her as though she were made of spun glass. "Does it hurt much?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Not when you are taking care of it," Eliza said truthfully. She reached up and covered his hand with hers where it rested against her cheek. "Caleb, I need you to understand something. I love you, but I'm also scared. Thomas hurt me in ways that were not just physical. He made me believe that I was worthless, that I deserved the pain, that no one would ever want me except to use me. I do not know how to be with someone in a healthy way. I do not know if I can give you what you need." Caleb took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "I only need you to give me what you can, when you can. I do not need you to be anything other than who you are, and as for the rest, we will figure it out together. No rushing, no pressure. We have all the time in the world." "What if I am broken?" Eliza whispered. "Then we will mend together," Caleb replied firmly. "But Eliza, you are not broken. You are bent maybe, scarred certainly, but not broken. You survived. That takes a strength most people never have to find. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be that strong alone again." Eliza leaned forward and kissed him again, pouring all her gratitude and hope and love into the press of her lips against his. Caleb responded with the same careful tenderness, his hands cradling her face as though she were the most precious thing he had ever held. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. Caleb had his arm around Eliza's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, marveling at how right it felt to be there. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Thomas is still my legal husband. If he finds me, he could force me to return." "Then we make sure he does not find you," Caleb said, "and if he does, he will have to go through me first. But Eliza, there is another option. The frontier is not like the East. Things are more flexible here. If we were to present ourselves as married, no one would question it. You could take my name, live as my wife in truth, and Thomas Thornton would have no legal claim on you anymore." Eliza's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," Caleb said, and smiled at her surprised expression. "When I ask you to marry me, it is going to be because you want it, not because you need protection from another man. I want you to be free to choose me, Eliza. Really choose me, without fear or necessity driving your decision. But in the meantime, if you want the protection that being known as my wife would bring, I am offering that. Think of it as temporary armor while you heal and figure out what you really want." It was such a Caleb thing to say, offering her protection while simultaneously ensuring she knew she had choices. Eliza felt love for him swell until it was almost painful. "You are unlike any man I've ever known." "I will take that as a compliment," Caleb said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They fell into a new routine after that day. To the outside world, Eliza became Eliza Stone, and the few people who came up from the trading post accepted this without question. Frontier life did not invite too many inquiries into people's pasts, but inside the cabin, Caleb continued to treat Eliza with the same respect and care he always had. He never pressured her, never assumed that their declared feelings meant he had rights to her body or her space. He courted her, bringing her wildflowers and taking her on long walks through the mountains, teaching her to ride the gentle mare he kept in the barn, and showing her the hidden places where the views stretched for miles. Slowly, carefully, Eliza began to heal. The tension she carried in her shoulders eased. Her nightmares became less frequent. She laughed more, smiled more, and began to remember who she had been before Thomas broke her down into something small and fearful. And Caleb was there for all of it, patient and steady as the mountains themselves. It was September when Eliza realized she wanted more than the careful distance they had been maintaining. They had been sitting by the fire, and Caleb had been reading aloud from a book of poetry he had traded for at the post, his deep voice giving music to the words. Eliza had been watching him in the firelight, thinking about how much she loved the sound of his voice, the way his lips shaped the words, the strength in his hands as he held the book. She reached over and took the book from him, setting it aside. Caleb looked at her questioningly, and Eliza felt her heart racing, but did not let fear stop her. "I want you to kiss me," she said. "I kiss you all the time," Caleb replied gently, but his eyes had darkened with understanding. "No, I mean really kiss me," Eliza clarified. "I want to know what it feels like to want someone and not be afraid. I trust you, Caleb. I want this." "Eliza," Caleb said carefully, "are you sure? There is no rush." "I am sure," Eliza said, and she was. "I love you, and I want to show you. I want to feel something other than dread when I think about being close to someone. I want to replace those terrible memories with good ones, please." Caleb studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but the moment you want to stop, you say the word and we stop. No questions, no disappointment. Understood?" "Understood," Eliza agreed. Caleb reached out and pulled her gently into his lap, settling her so she was straddling his thighs, facing him. This position put them at eye level, and Eliza realized that was intentional, giving her the control and the ability to pull away easily if she needed to. His hands rested lightly on her waist over her clothes, warm but not constraining. "You're in charge," he said softly. "We go at your pace, only as far as you are comfortable. Tell me what you want." Eliza leaned forward and kissed him, and Caleb responded immediately, his lips moving against hers with more passion than he had allowed before, but still restrained, still careful. She felt the desire in him, the want he had been keeping carefully leashed, and instead of frightening her, it thrilled her. This powerful man wanted her, and yet he was letting her control everything. She deepened the kiss, her hands moving to his hair, and Caleb made a low sound of pleasure that sent heat pooling in her belly. His hands tightened slightly on her waist, and she pressed closer, feeling the hard planes of his chest against her softer curves. It felt good. It felt right. They kissed until Eliza was breathless and dizzy, until she was trembling with a need she barely understood, and then Caleb slowly drew back, his breathing ragged. "We should stop here," he said, his voice rough. "Why?" Eliza asked, genuinely confused. She was not scared. She wanted more. "Because I do not want to rush you," Caleb said. "And because when we go further than this, I want it to be special. I want to marry you first if you will have me. I want to do this right." Eliza stared at him, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Is that a proposal?" Caleb smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and almost vulnerable. "I suppose it is. Eliza, I know we have not known each other long, not really, but I'm more certain of you than I have ever been of anything in my life. I want to spend every day showing you what love is supposed to look like. I want to give you the life you deserve, the tenderness you should have always known. I want to be the man whose hands you never have to fear. Will you marry me? For real this time, not just for protection or convenience, but because you want to build a life with me." "Yes," Eliza said, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you so much. Caleb, you have given me back parts of myself I thought were lost forever. You have shown me that I am worthy of kindness and care. I want to be your wife in every way that matters." Caleb pulled her close and held her, and Eliza felt the shudder run through him, heard the thickness in his voice when he spoke. "You have made me the happiest man in these mountains. I promise you, Eliza, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know how loved you are." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the trading post, with Henry and his wife serving as witnesses. Eliza wore a simple dress that Caleb had commissioned from a seamstress in the nearest town, pale blue fabric that brought out her eyes, and Caleb wore clean trousers and a shirt that actually fit his massive frame properly. He looked nervous and eager and so handsome that Eliza's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her. The ceremony was brief, just the essential words spoken by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. But when Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him, Eliza felt as though invisible chains that had bound her for years finally fell away. She was free. She was loved. She was married to a man who treated her hands as though they were capable of beautiful things rather than just tools for his convenience. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped and nothing like what she had feared. Caleb took his time, treating her body with the same reverence he brought to everything he did, making sure she felt pleasure and safety in equal measure. He was patient with her nervousness, gentle with her scars, both visible and invisible, and when they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, Eliza wept at the beauty of it. This was what intimacy was supposed to be, a joining rather than a taking, a gift freely given and received with gratitude. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness of their bedroom, Caleb held her close and stroked her hair. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am more than all right," Eliza said, her voice full of wonder. "I did not know it could be like that. I did not know I could feel so much and not be afraid." "You never have to be afraid with me," Caleb promised. "My hands will only ever know your tenderness, Eliza. That is my vow to you, every day for the rest of our lives." Eliza pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "And my hands will always know your kindness," she replied. "We will build something good together, Caleb, something true and lasting." "We already have," Caleb said, and pulled her closer as they drifted off to sleep, secure in each other's arms. The first winter of their marriage was hard in the way that all mountain winters were hard, with deep snows and bitter cold that sometimes kept them cabin-bound for days at a time. But inside their home, there was warmth and laughter and love. Caleb taught Eliza to play chess on a set he had carved himself, and she taught him card games she had learned at the boarding house. They read books together by firelight and made love with increasing confidence and joy, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal dedication. Spring came eventually, as it always did in the mountains, and with it came news that made Eliza's blood run cold. A man had been asking about her at the trading post, describing her perfectly and claiming to be her husband. Thomas had found her. Caleb took the news with his characteristic calm, though Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders and the hard set of his jaw. "He cannot take you," he said firmly. "You are my wife now, legally married to me. Even if he makes a fuss, there is nothing he can do." "You do not know him," Eliza said, old fears rising up like ghosts. "He does not let go of things he considers his. He will come here. He will try to hurt you." "Let him come," Caleb said, and there was steel in his voice. "I am not afraid of him, Eliza, and I will not let him hurt you ever again." Thomas Thornton arrived at their cabin 3 days later, riding up the trail with the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged in his life. He was a handsome man in a slick way, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed too well for the frontier in a suit that must have cost a month's wages. But his eyes, when they landed on Eliza where she stood on the porch, were cold and calculating. "There you are," he said, dismounting as though he had every right to be there. "I have been looking for you for months, wife. It is time to stop this foolishness and come home." Caleb stepped out of the cabin before Eliza could respond, positioning himself between her and Thomas. The difference between the two men was striking. Thomas was tall and lean, but next to Caleb's muscular bulk, he looked almost insubstantial. Still, there was a dangerous edge to Thomas that Eliza recognized, the kind of man who would use weapons and tricks rather than face an opponent directly. "You are not welcome here," Caleb said, his voice calm but implacable. "Eliza is my wife now, legally married. She is no longer your concern." Thomas's face darkened with rage. "That is not a legal marriage. She was already married to me. That makes her a bigamist and you a criminal for harboring another man's wife." "Your marriage was dissolved when you abandoned your responsibilities as a husband," Caleb countered. "Eliza has the scars to prove you failed in every way a husband can fail. But more importantly, she does not want to go with you. That should be the end of this discussion." "She does not get a choice," Thomas snarled, his hand moving toward his coat. "She is mine, and I am taking her back even if I have to kill you to do it." Everything happened very fast. Thomas drew a pistol from inside his coat, but Caleb had anticipated this. He moved with the speed Eliza had seen before, closing the distance before Thomas could aim properly. Caleb's hand clamped around Thomas's wrist like a vice, and there was a sickening crack as bones broke. Thomas screamed and dropped the gun. "You made a mistake coming here," Caleb said, and his voice was deadly quiet. "You made a bigger mistake threatening my wife, but your biggest mistake was thinking I would let you take her without a fight." He released Thomas's broken wrist, and Thomas stumbled backward, cradling his injured arm and staring at Caleb with a mix of fear and hatred. "This is not over," he spat. "I will go to the law. I will have you arrested for assault and theft." "Go ahead," Caleb said. "The nearest law is 100 miles away. And by the time you get there and bring anyone back, every person in this territory will testify that Eliza Stone has been living here as my wife for nearly a year. They will testify that she came here fleeing violence and that you are a man who beats women, your word against all of ours. Who do you think they will believe?" Thomas looked between Caleb and Eliza saw the moment he realized he had lost. His face twisted with impotent rage. "You are nothing," he said to Eliza. "You are worthless trash and you will regret leaving me. You will never find happiness because you are too broken, too damaged, too stupid." The words that once would have cut her to the bone now bounced off harmlessly. Eliza stepped forward, standing beside Caleb, and looked Thomas in the eye. "I already have found happiness," she said clearly. "I have found a man who knows how to treat a woman with respect and love. I have found a life where I am valued and cherished. You have no power over me anymore, Thomas. You never will again. Go back to wherever you came from and leave us alone." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, perhaps seeing for the first time the strength she had found, the woman she had become in the months since leaving him. Then he turned and mounted his horse clumsily with his broken wrist and rode away without another word. Eliza watched him disappear down the trail and felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Caleb and found him watching her with such pride and love in his eyes that she felt tears prick her own. "You are magnificent," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. I'm so proud of you." "He cannot hurt me anymore," Eliza said, marveling at the truth of it. "I do not belong to him. I never really did. I belong to myself, and I choose to share my life with you." "The best choice you could have made," Caleb said with a smile, and kissed her thoroughly while the mountain wind sang through the pines around them. The years that followed were full and rich. Caleb's claim prospered, and he built additions onto the cabin to accommodate the family they both wanted. Eliza's belly rounded with their first child in the spring of 1872, and Caleb hovered over her with such devoted attention that she sometimes had to gently remind him she was pregnant, not made of glass. Their son was born on a clear autumn morning, with Henry's wife serving as midwife. Eliza labored through the night while Caleb paced the main room wearing a path in the floorboards, and when he was finally allowed in to meet his child, he took one look at the tiny red-faced infant and burst into tears. "He is perfect," Caleb said, his voice choked with emotion as he carefully held his son for the first time. "He is so small. How is he so small?" "He will grow," Eliza said, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "He has your size to live up to. Give him time." They named him James, after Caleb's father who had died when Caleb was young, and he did indeed grow, becoming a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, dark-haired and fierce from the moment she drew breath. They named her Sarah, and she became the light of both their lives. Caleb proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, his huge hands somehow perfectly capable of holding tiny babies and changing nappies and rocking children to sleep. He built toys and told stories and taught his children about the mountain with the same patience he had shown Eliza. And he never raised his voice in anger, never lifted his hand except in gentleness, showing his son what it meant to be a good man and his daughter that she deserved nothing less than respect. Eliza watched him with their children and fell more in love with him each day. This was the life she had never dared to dream of, the family she had thought was impossible for someone like her. But here it was, real and solid and full of joy. One evening, when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, Eliza stood at the window watching Caleb play with the children in the yard. He was down on his hands and knees, pretending to be a bear while they shrieked with laughter and climbed on his back. The setting sun cast everything in golden light, and Eliza pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the fullness of her heart. Caleb glanced up and caught her watching. He smiled, that open, honest smile that still had the power to make her breath catch, and mouthed, "I love you," across the distance. Eliza mouthed it back, and the moment stretched between them, full of understanding and gratitude, and the kind of love that had been built slowly, carefully, with tenderness and trust. That night, after the children were asleep and they were alone in their room, Caleb pulled Eliza into his arms. "What were you thinking about today?" he asked, "when you were watching us play?" "I was thinking about hands," Eliza said softly. "About how I never knew hands that did not hurt until I met you. About how your hands have only ever known tenderness when they touch me and our children. About how grateful I am that you found me that day in the trading post." "I am the one who should be grateful," Caleb said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You saved me, Eliza. I was just existing before you came into my life, going through the motions. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love and be loved in return. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be." "We saved each other," Eliza corrected, looking up at him. "That is what love does. It does not complete you or fix you, but it gives you a safe place to heal and grow. It gives you hands that hold rather than hurt." "Hands that hold rather than hurt," Caleb repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. That is what I want our children to know, what I want them to expect from the people they choose to love. That hands should be for building up, not tearing down, for caressing, not causing pain." "They will know it," Eliza said with certainty, "because they have you as an example, because they are growing up in a home filled with love and respect. They will never settle for less than they deserve, because you are showing them what real love looks like every single day." As the years continued to roll by, the Stone family became a fixture in the small community that grew up around the trading post. Caleb's reputation as a fair and honorable man spread, and people sought his advice and help with their own claims and disputes. Eliza became known for her kindness and her skill with healing herbs, often treating injuries and illnesses for families in the area. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy and another girl, and their cabin rang with the sounds of laughter and occasional arguments and all the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. The children grew strong and confident, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished, and they in turn learned to be kind and protective of those who needed help. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Eliza back to the meadow where he had first fought for her, where everything had changed between them. It was summer again, and the blackberries were ripe, just as they had been that day. But now everything was different. They were different. "Do you remember what you asked me that day?" Caleb said as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the mountain vista. "After I told those men you were mine?" "I asked if you meant it," Eliza said, smiling at the memory. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now," Caleb said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You are mine, Eliza, in the best possible way. Not because I own you or control you, but because you have given yourself to me freely, just as I have given myself to you. We belong to each other by choice, by love, by the life we have built together, and I would choose you again every single day." "As I would choose you," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "You kept your promise, Caleb. Your hands have only known tenderness when they touch me. You have shown me what real love looks like, what a true partnership should be. You have healed wounds I did not know could be healed. I love you more than words can say." They kissed there in the meadow, the same place where their love had truly begun, and renewed the vows they had made a decade before, to honor and cherish, to protect and support, to love through whatever challenges life might bring, to be each other's safe harbor in a sometimes dangerous world. As they walked back to their cabin hand in hand, Eliza thought about the terrified, broken woman who had stumbled into that trading post so many years ago. She barely recognized that person anymore. In her place was someone strong and confident, a woman who knew her own worth, a mother and wife who had learned that love did not have to hurt, that hands could hold without crushing, that a man's strength could be used to protect rather than dominate. She squeezed Caleb's hand, feeling the calluses earned through honest work, feeling the size and power held in careful check, and smiled. These hands, these wonderful, gentle hands, had rebuilt her from the inside out, showing her day by day, touch by touch, that she was worthy of love and care and respect. That evening, with their children tucked into bed and the mountain night settling around their cabin, Caleb and Eliza sat together on their porch, as they had done countless times before. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, bright and clear in the thin mountain air, and somewhere, in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound lonely and wild and perfectly suited to the landscape. "Tell me something," Caleb said, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you happy? Truly happy?" Eliza did not answer right away. She thought about the question seriously, examining her life from every angle. She thought about the scars she still carried, both visible and invisible, the memories that still occasionally surfaced in nightmares, the ways she had been changed by her experiences. But then she thought about her children sleeping safely in their beds, about the man beside her who had never once raised his voice in anger, about the home they had built together through patience and love and unwavering commitment. "I am happy," she said finally, and the truth of it rang in her voice. "Not because everything is perfect or because I have forgotten where I came from, but because I have learned what it means to be truly loved, because I wake up every morning in a home where I am valued and respected, because my children will never know the fear I knew, because you have shown me that my past does not define my future. Yes, Caleb, I am truly, deeply happy." "Good," Caleb said, pulling her closer. "That is all I ever wanted for you. That is all I will ever want. Your happiness, your peace, your freedom to be exactly who you are meant to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the bond they had forged. After a while, Eliza spoke again, her voice soft in the darkness. "Cry. When I was married to Thomas, I used to think that violence was just a part of life, that being hurt by the person who claimed to love you was normal. I had nothing to compare it to, no frame of reference for what a healthy relationship should look like. And then I met you, and you were so patient, so careful, always making sure I knew I had choices. Do you know what that did for me? It gave me back myself. It showed me that I deserved better than what I had been accepting. You taught me that love is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. You deserved that from the very beginning, Caleb said firmly. No one should have to learn those lessons the hard way. But I'm grateful that I got to be the one to show you what you had been missing, that I got to be the one whose hands could touch you without causing pain. Your hands have only ever known my tenderness, Eliza said, echoing the words he had spoken on their wedding night. And mine have only known your kindness. That is the foundation we built our life on, and it has never wavered, not once in 10 years. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, banking the fire and checking on their sleeping children before retiring to their own room. They undressed each other slowly, with the ease of long familiarity, but also with the reverence that had never faded, and came together in the marriage bed they had shared for a decade. Caleb's touch was still as gentle as it had been that first night, still full of care and attention to her needs and desires, and Eliza responded with the freedom of a woman who had never once feared the man in her bed. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza thought about all the years still ahead of them, all the challenges they would face and joys they would share. Their children would grow and leave to build lives of their own. They would weather hardships and celebrate triumphs. They would grow old together in their mountain cabin, their hands becoming weathered and worn, but never losing the tenderness they had cultivated from the very start. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, knowing Caleb was still awake beside her. "I love you too," he replied, his voice a rumble in the night. "Always have, always will, until my last breath and beyond." The years continued their steady march. James grew tall and strong like his father, inheriting Caleb's size and gentle nature. He married a girl from the trading post at 21, a sweet-natured woman named Margaret, who reminded Eliza of herself when she was young, and they settled on land adjacent to Caleb's claim. Sarah became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education, and she opened a small school that served the children of the growing community. Their younger children also thrived, finding their own paths in life, all of them carrying forward the lessons of love and respect they had learned from their parents. Caleb and Eliza became grandparents, and watching Caleb with his grandchildren was perhaps even more touching than watching him with his own children had been. He was softer now, his hair silver at the temples and his face deeply lined from years of sun and wind, but his hands were still gentle, still careful, still the hands that had first shown Eliza what love without pain looked like. One autumn evening, when they were both in their 50s and their children had long since left home, Eliza and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire and gold. They had been married for more than 25 years, and Eliza still felt a thrill when Caleb took her hand in his. "Do you ever think about how different your life might have been if you had not run that day?" Caleb asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "If you had stayed with Thomas?" "I would be dead," Eliza said simply. "Either he would have killed me outright, or I would have died inside bit by bit until there was nothing left of who I really was. Running saved my life, but you gave me a reason to live. There is a difference." "I think about it sometimes," Caleb admitted, "about what would have happened if I had not come into the trading post that day, if I had not heard you asking for help. What if I had stayed up on my claim and missed you entirely? The thought terrifies me, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You and our children are everything to me." "We found each other," Eliza said. "That is what matters. Somehow, against all odds, in this vast wilderness, two broken people found each other and built something beautiful together. That is not chance, mocked Caleb. That is destiny." "Destiny," Caleb repeated, smiling. "I like that. It was our destiny to find each other, to heal each other, to build this life together. And to show other people what real love looks like," Eliza added. "Our children, our grandchildren, everyone who has watched us over the years. We have been proof that love does not have to hurt, that marriage can be a partnership of equals, that hands can be instruments of tenderness rather than weapons." "The legacy we leave behind," Caleb mused. "Not land or money, but the example of how to treat the people you love with respect and care." The most important legacy there is, Eliza agreed. As they grew older still, they slowed down but never stopped appreciating each other. Caleb's strength waned somewhat with age, though he remained powerful compared to most men, and Eliza's hair turned silver, but her smile was still bright and her spirit still fierce. They took care of each other through the various aches and pains that come with advancing years, each being the other's comfort and support. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. It was a warm summer day, much like the day they had married, and Eliza stood at the window watching 3 generations of her family laughing and playing in the yard. James was there with Margaret and their 4 children. Sarah had brought her husband and their twins. The youngest children had come with their own growing families. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "Look at what we built," he said softly. "All of this, all of them, they exist because you were brave enough to run, and I was lucky enough to find you." "We built it together," Eliza corrected, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Every part of it we did together. That is what makes it so special." At the dinner table that evening, surrounded by their family, James stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the conversations, "to my parents who have shown all of us what real love looks like. Dad, you taught me that strength is not about how much you can lift or how hard you can hit, but about how gentle you can be with the people you love. You taught me that a real man protects without controlling, supports without demanding, and loves without conditions. Mom, you taught me that survival is not just about enduring, but about rebuilding yourself into someone even stronger than before. You taught me that past wounds do not have to define your future, that healing is possible, and that love can overcome even the deepest scars." He paused, his eyes bright with emotion. "You taught all of us that hands should hold, not hurt, that love should lift up, not tear down. That marriage is a partnership between equals who choose each other every single day. 40 years you have been married, and not once have I seen you treat each other with anything less than respect and tenderness. That is the example I try to follow in my own marriage, and I know I speak for all of us when I say that we are who we are because of the love you showed us. To Caleb and Eliza Stone, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for." "To Caleb and Eliza," the family chorused, raising their glasses. Eliza could not stop the tears that flowed freely down her cheeks. And Caleb was not far behind, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he pulled her close and kissed her forehead. They were surrounded by love, by the tangible proof that they had succeeded in breaking the cycle of violence and pain, that they had created something good and true that would outlast them both. As the sun set on that perfect day, and their family eventually dispersed back to their own homes, Eliza and Caleb found themselves alone once more in the cabin that had been their haven for so many years. They moved through their evening routine with the ease of long practice, helping each other in the small ways that had become habit over 4 decades together. That night, lying in bed with the windows open to let in the cool mountain air, Eliza took Caleb's hand and brought it to her lips, kissing his scarred knuckles. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Caleb asked, though his voice held understanding. "For everything. For saving me that day in the trading post. For showing me what love really is. For being patient while I learned to trust again. For giving me a family and a home and a life beyond anything I ever dared to dream. For 40 years of waking up beside someone who makes me feel cherished every single day. For hands that have only known tenderness." Caleb cupped her face in his palms, those large, gentle hands that had never once caused her pain, and looked into her eyes with all the love he possessed. "The honor has been mine," he said. "Every moment of these 40 years, every challenge and joy, every ordinary day and special celebration, it has all been an honor and a privilege. You are the greatest gift I have ever received, Eliza. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is how it works when you find your destiny." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of decades of shared history, and held each other close as sleep claimed them. And if their hands remained entwined throughout the night, fingers interlaced in a grip that was secure but never tight, well, That was exactly as it should be. Because they had learned, slowly and surely over the course of their life together, that love was not about possession or control. It was about holding on gently, supporting without smothering, being present without being overwhelming. It was about hands that held rather than hurt, about choosing tenderness every single day. The seasons turned, as they always did in the mountains. Winters came and went, bringing snow and cold, but also the cozy warmth of the cabin and the pleasure of being snowed in together. Springs arrived with rushing water and newborn animals and the promise of renewal. Summers blazed hot and bright, filled with long days and warm nights. Autumns painted the aspens gold and reminded them that all things must change, must transform, must eventually come to their natural end. Eliza and Caleb grew older still, their steps slower, but their love as strong as ever. They spent their days in quiet contentment, working in their garden, receiving visits from their children and grandchildren, and eventually even great-grandchildren. They told stories of the old days, of how they met and fell in love, and the younger generations listened with rapt attention, storing away the lessons contained in those tales. When Eliza was 72 years old, she fell ill with a fever that would not break. Caleb tended her with the same gentle care he had always shown, sitting by her bedside and holding her hand, whispering words of love and encouragement even when she was too weak to respond. Their children came, gathering around. But it was Caleb she wanted, Caleb she called for, Caleb whose presence brought her comfort. On a clear autumn morning, with the aspens blazing gold outside her window and her husband's hand clasped firmly in hers, Eliza opened her eyes and smiled at him. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How could I be afraid when I have known such love?" "You do not have to go," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Please, Eliza, I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Eliza assured him, reaching up with her free hand to touch his face, tracing the beloved lines and contours she knew as well as her own. "I will always be with you. In the cabin we built together, in the children we raised, in every life we touched. You saved me, Caleb. You gave me a life worth living, and I have loved every moment of it." "I love you," Caleb said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I love you so much." "I know," Eliza said. "I have always known, and I love you too, with everything I am, everything I was, and everything I will be. Thank you for your hands. Caleb, thank you for showing me what tenderness is." She closed her eyes then, her breathing growing shallow, and passed peacefully from this life to the next with a smile on her face, and her husband's hand holding hers with the same gentleness he had shown from the very first day. Caleb Stone lived for 5 more years after his beloved Eliza passed, and though he continued on, caring for his claim and welcoming his family when they visited, everyone could see that part of him had gone with her. He spoke of her often, always with love and never with regret, telling anyone who would listen about the woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. On a cold winter morning, just before dawn, Caleb took his last breath in the bed he had shared with Eliza for more than 50 years. His children found him there, looking peaceful and almost young again, his face relaxed in a slight smile, as though he had seen something wonderful in those final moments. In his hand was Eliza's wedding ring, which he had worn on a chain around his neck since her death, held close to his heart. They buried him next to Eliza on a hillside overlooking their cabin, beneath the pines they had both loved. The whole community came to pay their respects to Caleb Stone, the mountain man who had been legendary not for his strength or his skill as a trapper, but for his kindness and his unwavering devotion to the woman he loved. The headstone they erected bore simple words: "Caleb Stone, beloved husband, father, and friend, his hands knew only tenderness." And below, on Eliza's stone, they added new words to match: "Eliza Stone, beloved wife, mother, and survivor. She taught us that love heals all wounds." The cabin remained in the family, passing down through generations, each one maintaining it and telling the story of Caleb and Eliza to their children. It became a place of pilgrimage for family members, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were meant to carry forward. And always, always, the story was the same. She had never known hands that did not hurt until she met the mountain man who made sure his hands knew only her tenderness. Years turned to decades, and decades to centuries, but the story lived on. It lived on in the way James treated Margaret, in the way their children treated their spouses, in generation after generation of Stone descendants who understood that love was not about power or control, but about gentle hands and tender hearts. The legacy that Caleb and Eliza had built together, forged in pain and built with patience, proved to be the most enduring thing of all. And sometimes, on clear autumn evenings when the aspens blazed gold and the mountain wind sang through the pines, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the meadow where it all began. A massive man with shoulders that could carry the world, and a slender woman whose smile could light up the darkness, their fingers interlaced in a grip that was sure but gentle, holding without hurting, loving without conditions, together for all eternity. Because some love stories do not end when life does. Some love is strong enough to transcend death itself, to remain as a beacon for all who come after, showing them that no matter how dark the past, no matter how deep the wounds, healing is possible. Love is possible. And hands that once knew only violence can learn tenderness if given the chance by someone brave enough to show them the way. Eliza had been that someone for Caleb, teaching him that his strength was most powerful when tempered with gentleness. And Caleb had been that someone for Eliza, showing her that she was worthy of love and care and respect. Together, they had built something that would last forever, a love story written not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in the quiet, steady accumulation of 10,000 small moments of tenderness, of hands that held without hurting, of love that lifted up without tearing down, of two broken people who found each other in the wilderness and proved that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from being fixed, but from being loved exactly as you are. And that was the legacy of Caleb and Eliza Stone, the mountain man and the woman who ran toward a better life. Not wealth or fame or conquest, but the simple, powerful truth that love, real love, is the most transformative force in the universe. It had transformed them both, and through them it transformed everyone they touched, rippling outward through time like stones cast into still water, creating circles of tenderness that would never end. Their story became legend, passed down through generations not just of their own family, but of everyone who heard it and recognized its truth. It became a touchstone for those fleeing violence, a promise that escape was possible, and that a better life waited on the other side of fear. It became a challenge to men who thought strength meant dominance, showing them instead that true strength lay in restraint and gentleness. It became hope for anyone who had ever felt broken, proof that the human spirit could heal and grow and thrive if given love and time and safety. And in the cabin on the mountain, maintained now by the great-great-great-grandchildren of Caleb and Eliza Stone, visitors could still see the simple life they had built together. The hand-carved furniture Caleb had made, the quilts Eliza had stitched, the photographs on the walls showing a large, powerful man, and the woman who stood beside him as his equal, their faces glowing with genuine love and happiness. The small room with the lock on the door that had given Eliza her first taste of safety. The marriage bed where they had learned together what real intimacy could be. But most of all, visitors saw the truth that permeated every corner of that cabin, soaked into its very timbers, that this had been a place of love. Not perfect love, because humans are incapable of perfection, but real love. Honest love. The kind of love that says, I see your wounds and I will not add to them. I see your fears and I will not exploit them. I see your worth even when you cannot, and I will remind you of it every single day until you believe it yourself. That was the love Caleb had shown Eliza, and that Eliza had eventually learned to show herself. That was the love they had built their marriage on, their family on, their entire life on. And it had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. So the story ended where it began, in the wilderness of the Colorado Rockies, with two souls who found each other against all odds and chose love over fear, tenderness over violence, hope over despair. She never knew hands that did not hurt until she met the mountain man who made sure his hands knew only her tenderness. And in learning that lesson, in living that truth every day of their long life together, They showed the world what was possible when love was allowed to be what it was always meant to be. A safe harbor, a healing force, and the gentle touch of hands that held without hurting. And that, in the end, was everything.